high of 30 degrees, and just as we walk quickly to get in here, I think we'll be walking quickly to get out because it's a short caseload today. So with that, let's kick this thing off and get right in. So our first order of business, as always, is to review and approve or amend the decision letters and minutes from last month's meeting. So I know we've had a few minutes to do that so far while we wait, and I'll entertain a motion.
I'll be recusing myself since I wasn't here.
That's right. Commissioner Fulmer accuses himself. He wasn't here last meeting.
I will be doing the same. As
was Ms. Simpson. All right, motion to approve as presented by Mr. Lewis. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Abbott. Halter. We need to change your, oh no, we don't need to change your sign. Never mind. That's right. And all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. All right. First and only item on the agenda today is Estes Road. If the applicant could come to the front here while Logan introduces the case.
Opening statements to the applicant. If you are not satisfied with the decision made by the Stormwater Management Commission, you may appeal the decision by filing for a writ of certiorari with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date of the Commission's decision. You are advised to seek the independent advice of legal counsel to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been satisfied. Case number 1 on the agenda, case 2024-00024, 3702B Estes Road at 3702B Estes Road. APN is 116-120-10500. Inspector is Development Services Single Family. Council District 34, Sandy Ewing. Applicant's request, disturbance of the Zone 1 floodway buffer to remove existing encroachments and to provide compensating cut. Disturbance of the Zone 2 floodway buffer to construct a home, pool, and associated appurtenances to allow compensating cut to be counted below the 2-year flood elevation. Appellant is Nathan Hardin, represented by Daniel Whitley, Arnold Consulting Engineering Services Incorporated. Comments: this project, Stormwater staff, this project is a tear down and is considered new development. Staff does not support an extensive patio in the water quality buffer. Codes, no comment provided. Planning, no comment provided. Greenways is not requesting a greenway or greenway easement.
All right, I know the applicant has been here before, but I'll go ahead and just give a quick overview. You'll have 10 minutes to present your case, and then we'll open it up for public hearing. If there's anybody here to speak in favor or against, we'll have 2 minutes at the podium, and then we'll close public hearing and then deliberate and have some questions for you. So I'll let you introduce yourself and then start the 10-minute clock after. If you don't mind pressing the red button on your mic, sorry, so that we're recorded.
Right here? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, Nathan Hardin. I've got Dan, the engineer, here on a call for, he's a new father, so please excuse him sort of FaceTiming into this, but I know there's a chance that there might be a question or two, and he's happy to answer. So I'll just put him up here if he needs to talk to you, so.
Is that a first for the commission to have a virtual applicant?
I believe so, but we clarified that was possible with ITS
so,
before. So we did. He did
help
ask.
From technology. So Dan's a new dad up in Bowling Green, and so thank you, Dan, for being here.
Congrats, Dan. All right. With that, I'll start the clock.
All right. So. Yeah, as you all are pretty familiar with the project by now, I think probably the biggest change since we were here last is to the landscape plan. One of the comments we received was we needed a larger variety of trees, or a variety of larger trees. So that has been changed, and I know there were some questions that arose about the cut and the sort of water displacement there. So Dan should be able to address those if those are still relevant at this point. So yeah, that's our new plan with the larger trees there. Yeah, are there any specific questions that I could address beyond those things? Or Dan, do you want to talk about just what we've done with adding the cut area in the back?
Yes, if you're referencing sheet C3, we dug a kind of I guess you would call it a basin back there in the back to offset the fill in the floodplain. We are currently providing 4,374 cubic feet of cut, 2,760 cubic feet of fill. So we are offsetting the fill at a 1.5 ratio, which is more than what the city of Nashville requires. So we're actually providing more volume in the floodplain than what is currently there.
Okay, thanks, Tim. All right. I think that pretty much wraps up the major changes. So
Okay.
yeah. All right.
All right, with that, I'll close applicant's hearing.
Anything else to add, Dan, or is that pretty much does it, correct?
I mean, that was pretty much the biggest change from last time, other than the landscaping. So.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, so applicant's presentation closed. I'll open it up to public hearings. Anybody here to speak in favor or against? If so, go ahead and come on up and state your name and address, and make sure you press the red button.
There we go. Thank you. William Hickey. I'm at 3702A Estes Road, the property immediately to the left of this one. Since we were here last time, I guess my concern still is the water displacement. I believe there's a recommendation given by this committee about a report that they would have liked to have seen about that. I don't have my notes in front of me. I just drove back in from being out of town for 2 weeks. So I know that's probably somewhere logged into that. The only other question, that kind of a newer development that I've seen, and I haven't had a chance to understand this, is that this property was also listed for sale on November 12th. It's on the market right now, so I'm kind of trying to get a better understanding of what's going on here. Is this variance being requested to build for his own property, for his own use? Is he trying to, Mr. Harder, are you trying to use this buffer to make this property more marketable? Like, what's kind of going on with, it's here, it's on the market, but it's here asking for a variance to build something on this. So that's what I'm just kind of mostly wanting to find out here today as well. Right now, as the plan stands, I am opposed to it because I don't think the water displacement onto my property has been properly addressed through an engineering report or other information. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I don't see anybody else in the audience. Receiving any letters?
We had some older letters, one from Mr. Hickey and a few other neighbors, also from Councilmember Ewing. It was commenting on a previous plan, but I didn't get anything that said differently from her. And she also spoke at one of the previous meetings, I believe. There was some other people here that spoke in opposition at previous meetings as well. So but all the comments should be in your package.
Okay. All right, with that, I'll close public hearing and open it up to the commission for deliberation.
I see a pool in one sheet. I don't see a pool in another.
Yeah, the pool has been removed from the most recent plans, so.
Looks like it's still on pages 8 and 9.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mistakenly said that in my, I didn't change that when I read into the record, but I don't think there's a.
Yeah, that was in response to comments from the staff that, they felt that a pool in the zone 2 shouldn't be approved, so we took that out.
So those are just old plans in this set.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but if that is the current plan there, so you can see that there's no pool on the most recent.
And I believe the footprint of the patio hasn't really changed. It just doesn't have
Correct.
a pool in it. So
Correct.
it's the same amount of disturbance. It's just pool, no pool. But this is the current set of plans on the screen.
And for the record, I'd just note, he referenced sheet C3 when he said that's the plan.
Okay, thank you. I guess following up on the landscape updates, I guess they are. So it looks like you note 13 trees that are being removed, and I think this is part of the discussion last time. So there's 13 trees being removed, and I think I count 13 trees being provided for that mitigation. The concern, I believe, in my mind still is we're replacing mature existing trees with the same number of trees, and it looks like they're 2-inch caliber, and we talked about that, I think, last time. So you speak, I guess, to the changes that were made from last time to this time.
Yeah, my understanding was that, we had too many smaller varieties in the plan last time. So my instruction to the landscape architect was to, replace those with trees that would be comparable in size to whatever we were proposing to remove.
I mean, if you look at the numbers on this plan, you've got 5,500 square feet of house, 1,200 square feet of garage, lobby. That's almost 7,000 square feet plus 750 feet of patio. It's just a lot to then say, I can't avoid a buffer. I mean, I right now, I can't get behind this plan as presented.
I think the concern about the trees that we kind of voiced last time that kind of remains today is, I understand you've replaced them one for one, but I think when we're looking at mitigation of the impact, it's not necessarily saying I've taken one mature tree out, I'll replace it with one new tree that's 2 inches. When you think about the benefit and the value of what that existing tree is doing within that buffer and within that environment, to another tree, one for one, doesn't necessarily mitigate what the impact of removing those is. And then kind of looking at the plan, I noticed that tree number 10 is not noted as being removed, but there's a 2 foot by 1 foot gravel diaphragm that goes almost right through the trunk of it. So I don't think it's logical to think that tree's going to remain where it is. So I don't know that the landscape plan really reflects the mitigation for what the impact is.
Which tree is that?
Number 10.
And to Commissioner Fulmer's point, I believe this is the second time I think we've been before. I remember asking previously, and I think you've had an opportunity, but one of the discussions that we had, the current house is within a Zone 1 buffer, and we have taken that into consideration. As you know, we also have to look at exceptional hardship as well. One of the questions I'd asked you, currently right now, what is the amount of impervious square footage versus what you are proposing under the new plan?
I can answer that.
Dan can answer, yeah.
Yeah, so pre-existing total impervious area was 3,214 square feet. I'm reading this off of the C2 sheet. The post-development total impervious area is 3,746 square feet, but we talked with Logan about using a turf stone paver, which is a pervious paver system, to offset that impervious area. So if you count the turf stone pavers, the square footage for those were actually a net decrease of 135 square feet versus the pre-existing. If you count the turf stone pavers as pervious area, we only have a total impervious area of 3,079 square feet.
Does that include what's hatched as green that is actually covered by roof line?
Yes, it does.
That counts it as pervious or impervious?
It counts anything that's covered by either roof above or building above as impervious surface.
Part of the conversation we had in the last few meetings was, in looking at these cases, are we leaving the site in a better condition than it currently is? And so in this case, the existing house is within the Zone 1 buffer. And I think the previous conversations have been related to getting the new house being constructed outside of the Zone 1 and partially encroaching into the Zone 2. So I want to kind of put that back out there as something to consider as we deliberate.
And maybe I should reply to the Vice Chairman's comment earlier about just the total square footage of this. And it kind of segues from your comment there. That, for me as, look, I've been pretty clear about this, like from the beginning. I have to look at this from a dollars and cents standpoint as an investor in this property. And I kind of have, a couple options. And one is to keep the house that's there, which is not my preference. But the other one is to get, a design that works from a dollars and cents point, so make sense to tear down what's there now and build something new. And so, starting from scratch, a unspoiled piece of land is one discussion, and like what's feasible. But for me to justify tearing down, a usable house, I have to be able to produce something of a certain, gross value afterwards. So yes, it's not a modest cottage, that I'm proposing. And I totally understand from one point of view, it's like, I'm asking you to kind of maybe allow more than what you would be comfortable with in an ideal situation where there was, more land to work with, I guess. I would also just kind of point out that this sort of cantilever design, I guess, was partly our way to combat this problem of, I realize you can't count that as pervious square footage, that overhang, it has to be counted as impervious. But we were hoping that it would somewhat offset by, obviously some rain, some water, some of that's going to be landscaped, vegetation under there. That was just our artistic way of trying to, come closer to a smaller footprint on the property. So while this is a 5,500 approximately square foot house in total, I think the ground floor is like 1,200 square feet or something like that. That was just our attempt to kind of meet that way. So it's just, I guess my ultimate goal here was to try to come up with something that would be a net improvement from a stormwater standpoint, but also is makes sense as an investment. And I think we achieved that. I hope that we can, answer whatever concerns that you all have here today. But I think we've done, we've pushed as far as we could in terms of, creating a house that makes sense as an investment, but also, tries to improve the situation environmentally.
So I somewhat disagree with the compensating cut fill, because you're creating a bowl in the backyard. Water's got to fill up about a foot in there before it can overtop and leave. So that volume can't count towards mitigation. There's no way for it to get out other than to infiltrate. And normally it doesn't infiltrate well in floodway areas because that groundwater's just, it's typically pretty wet. It's almost, you messed up, you bought a property that you couldn't build what you want, and you're asking us to greatly reduce what would typically be the impact.
No, I was definitely aware of the stormwater restrictions when I bought it.
Well, then
Yeah.
you should have
So
gone through this process sooner. I don't think the stormwater works in the back. It's going to be a mosquito pit. You're tearing down all the trees that drink all the water. I get that there's a house there today back in the buffer, but to me, it's not done well. I don't think that the plans don't match, the mitigation's deficient. I mean, it's just, you're giving us something that's kind of not great and just saying, please approve it. I mean, you're putting us in a really hard spot.
I appreciate that.
I think it's clear where I stand, but be interested to hear what other people say.
So I missed one of the earlier meetings, and like the other commission members have noted, you're not giving us a lot to work with here. I do think, you've invested a lot in the design work of the property, but I do think you could potentially come up with a smaller footprint that does not encroach as much into the buffer zone. That's not ideal for profit, but your financial situation of investing in the property and trying to return the profit you want is not a hardship. By my view of this, and just purely looking at the hardship definition, I don't see a hardship on this. And I don't see enough mitigation to justify that you're doing more than the damage that you're trying to create. And the reality is you probably, you mentioned you could leave the house that's there and sell that and do that, and you wouldn't have to be before us with no changes to that property.
And I'm honestly, I'm comfortable doing that. It's not what I want to do. I wanted to do this school project and I think ultimately it's what's best, both like just for the neighborhood, because the house there is kind of an eyesore, and I think we can improve things from a stormwater standpoint, but I get it's not going as far as what you typically like to see in terms of the size of the house so totally respect that. And I feel like we've done the best we can, could there be improvements on the margins? Probably here and there, but we've given it, believe me, I've invested a lot of time and a lot of money to do this. But if the conclusion of the commission is that like keeping the house that's there is ultimately preferable, I'm definitely, understand that you all have got a job to do, and I can respect that. So thank you.
And to just add on what my other commissioners were saying, we are bound to kind of look at particular cases based on our stormwater management committee manual or commission now, and we have some court of appeal cases that to me made very clear, like the financial hardship of the property owner is never a good and sufficient cause for granting a variance. So I understand where you're coming from, but that's where you're looking to kind of maximize the profit that you can under some parameters, but when we're looking at hardship, that in and of itself is not a sufficient cause for an exceptional hardship.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's not a hardship per se for me to keep the existing house and rent it out. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say that. You know, I don't think that's the ideal situation all around, but yeah.
Is there any other comment from staff on this one before we go to a motion? Okay. Any other comments from the commissioners?
The only thing I would say is one of the other things that we balance is like the hardship against the community-wide flood damage prevention. Understanding that we have something in the Zone 1 buffer, this is an interesting case. It's not a normal case. You know, we've had more of these come before us recently, but listening to my other commissioners and their concerns about the current stormwater management plan being brought before us, I still don't know if we're really making things truly better from what I'm hearing.
So if I could speak to that, I do appreciate trying to get, you know, the footprint of the building out of the Zone 1 is just not enough, in my opinion, or adequate in terms of the design to really make an improvement, because we have to look at, you know, kind of the future situation. But, I mean, I'm not sure to what extent this property is at flood risk or may have flooded in the past, but, you know, I don't want to see, you know, homes in the buffer zone, but that's a pre-existing condition that we can't rule on. So the reality is I feel like the design would have to be almost considered independent of the prior house being there. While there is a benefit, I don't think it's quite enough.
All right. Sounded like we're working towards a motion. Any other discussion?
Make a motion to disapprove.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Any other discussion? All right. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, I'm sorry.
Thank you all.
It's been a long road, but
Yes, it has.
I hope you can make best use of what you have.
Yeah, we will. I appreciate your time and seeing me several times this year. And thanks for all your input along the way. And thank you, Logan, for all your help along the way.
I really appreciate your positive response. Thank you for that. That's
No worries.
helpful. So, all right, best of luck.
All right, thank you.
All right. All right, I see a PowerPoint presentation loading up. Is that our next item on the agenda, Logan?
Yeah, we might want to do that one first.
Okay,
Rebecca's going to present.
great.
Was there something else on the agenda, Logan, that we wanted to do before this?
No, not necessarily. We can do the other things after this if you want.
I mean, this is the riveting portion of the meeting. All right, I think we gave a similar presentation a couple years ago, but we decided to put together a little bit of a refresher on buffers to answer some questions that keep coming up and kind of keep this an open forum for us to discuss cases that come in front of you, not specific cases, but the general philosophy behind some of the cases that come before you on a regular basis. And also for you to know what staff does before a case gets to you when it comes to buffers. So this first slide, I decided to put a screenshot of, it's a sign we created with the Division of Forestry. We post a lot of these on our buyout properties, and Carol Ashworth and I helped create it. But it's a 6-panel sign that kind of talks about what buffers are and helps try to explain to the public why we want them. So, the benefits of buffers: they stabilize soils, they filter pollutions, they provide wildlife habitat. The woody debris that they drop into our streams is the basis of the food chain in those systems. They also shade the water, which helps keep it cool in the summer months especially, which helps prevent those algae blooms that you sometimes see. Not to mention our friend flood mitigation, which us as a stormwater department is really appreciative of. Ideally, we want a forested buffer. We want to have a variety of plant styles and heights and kind of a functioning ecosystem. We can't always have a completely forested buffer, but that is the ideal, a successional community that it goes to. One of the things that we do come up a lot is on these sites where there wasn't a forested buffer to begin with. So you're transitioning from sometimes an agricultural field or a yard into a buffer. So in those cases, we try to stress that, it's supposed to look messy. It's supposed to be shaggy. We get a lot of phone calls, mosquitoes, snakes, all these things are gonna, come onto my property. And in a lot of cases, I know you all have seen those development plans where, our buffer ends and their back porch begins. And sometimes we would like a buffer to the buffer, but we can't require that. But anyway, we do have people who get upset with how the buffers look as they're revegetating. And so these signs try to say that that's the way they're supposed to look. And it's really, it's going to be fine one day. Now, the other panels of the sign, they do talk about the macroinvertebrates that we find in the streams that are indicative of good water quality, and also some of the vegetation and animals we see. So these signs, when you have a metro project come before you, and we waive the regular buffer sign requirement, and we want to do an educational sign, we do offer this sign up to other metro projects and actually have edited the sign so that metro parks can use it. So that when you see those on some of your cases, you'll know what the sign is. All right, so what are our buffers? The water quality buffer came into being about the year 2000. Some projects were grandfathered in, so give and take. We always have to check back to the site plans to see. Our illustrious Michael Hunt was on the stakeholder committee that helped establish the buffer. So any pressing questions you have about that, you can direct towards him. So just like there are waters of the U.S. and waters of the state, we decided to put together community waters. So that speaks to what we protect, and it helps us differentiate when especially when you have the WOTUS, the waters of the U.S. go back and forth and back and forth. We try to keep consistent with what we protect, and we do align our what we classify as a stream with TDAC, so that we can be consistent as what's called a stream and not. Sometimes the Corps, they take into account ephemeral streams, or sometimes then they leave out ephemeral streams. So we just keep it as intermittent and perennial streams. Ponds with hydrologic connectivity, which means you can see a waterway going into it or coming out to it, or an obvious spring input, and then wetlands. Zone 1, of course, is a do not disturb zone. Ideally, as I mentioned, forest, you can't mow it. Zone 2 can be managed vegetation, so you can get in there and grade as long as you come back with grass or other vegetation, but no structures or impervious surfaces, and we do not allow stormwater control measures in Zone 2. That's because buffers themselves are a stormwater control measure, and if we were to allow other stormwater control measures in there, it would kind of be double dipping. So we do like those stormwater control measures to be out of Zone 2, although they will come to you sometimes and ask, and in certain cases, that's the only place to put a bioretention area or something. Here is our lovely buffer sign. These are the ones that we place along buffers. We didn't formally have that, I think, about 2007. We started requiring those, and that was because people kept not knowing where the buffer was and mowing into it. It's a beautiful example of clip art from the aughts. It still seems to work, but we would be fine with a redesign at some point. I mean, you remember clip art? It was really exciting. You had all these images, you could use them. Yeah. So what are our water quality buffers? So this defines, and you guys have seen in the manual, what we do protect. Wetlands, I should note, there is a special wetland policy that we adopted, I think 2016 or 2017, so that not every wetland requires a buffer or has to come to you. So if those wetlands have a lower moderate resource value and are less than 0.1 acres, and that is the whole wetland is less than 0.1 acres. We've had people come and say, oh, well, I only want to fill 0.99 acres of it, so it's fine. but it's of a 4-acre wetland, we say no, that still has to come to the committee. And so those do not have a buffer and they do not come to you. I should note on this, we are more conservative than TDEC. TDEC kind of has blanket policy for the entire state. And obviously, as you know, Metro has developed. We've lost a lot of our resources as a community. We have decided to be more conservative. So just because TDEC says you can encapsulate a stream or you can fill in a buffer, we don't necessarily feel that is good for us for water quality. And that's why those cases do come to you. So that we don't lose our sponginess, as Dodd used to say. And I should also note that I think we did finally put this into our regulations, but the buffers go skyward. We had a lot of people wanting to cantilever things over buffer, like, oh no, we aren't disturbing it, but we're hanging something over it, so that'll shade out the buffer, and that makes it so the plants aren't very happy. So we did put the skyward caveat in there as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So going back to the previous slide related to buffer distances and the 50 feet, where did that come from originally? Or the 30 feet?
And I don't know, I think our original buffer, when it was created, it was a 25-foot and a 50-foot. At a certain point, TDEC did construction buffers of 30 and 60, so I think that's why we set the minimum at 30 at that point. We do increase with size. Our 75-foot buffer on FEMA does coincide with the greenways easement that's created along those, so we wanted to make sure we matched up with greenways along those lines, and Shane Dennison at that point was part of our, I think, 2005 group that expanded the size of the buffers. I will note that one thing we are considering in the next reg revision is buffer averaging. That would probably keep more things from you, and TDEC does allow it. So that would be something that we are looking into this revision.
I was going to ask that point, and then the second one related to, and I see Michelle Lindsay coming up, any concession to elevation. So if we have a bluff, say on the Cumberland River, on the west side of the bluff, maybe 50, 75 feet, is there any concession given to buffer distances related to elevation?
Concessions are for you guys to give.
Okay.
But, you know, we do believe that even if it's not directly draining into a waterway, any green space that we can put next to our, especially our larger conveyances, is important. So, although we look at it, you know, especially if you could filter water draining slowly through the buffer, then to get to a waterway, that's the best effort. But just having that extra green space adjacent to water is something that we like to protect as well.
And I think that there was a case that came before this commission several years ago that was adjacent to the railroad track that crosses the Cumberland River, and there was a proposal to put a 3 or 4 story condominium.
And the Metro Park on Gay Street a few months ago.
There was a high bluff.
Yeah.
And that they wanted to cantilever their decks. And I think that was a variance that was granted, and those, you know, that whole development has been constructed.
And I should also note that we do have an internal policy where if a buffer is to cross a road or other parcels that we know are not going to develop, we don't necessarily apply that buffer a few parcels over, although it technically exists there. If we feel that we apply to cross a buffer, if there is the potential for that other parcel to redevelop, and we could capture that full buffer again adjacent to a stream, but we know if a metro road is there, it's probably not going away. So we don't bring those cases to you as well.
I did want to add that the original 25-foot buffer also included 40-acre drains. So if it was not a stream, you'd still apply a buffer if it was a 40-acre drain.
I want to point out one other thing in the third bullet down under streams, that when it defines the width of those buffers, 75 feet from the floodway is the measurement. But then it immediately says zone 1 equals the floodway plus 50 feet. So it can be wider than that 75 feet because it includes, we measure from the floodway to start the measurement of where those buffers are, but that floodway is also part of that. I mean, you can't, if you can't build in the zone 1 buffer, you certainly can't build in the floodway even closer to the stream or in the heart of what we're trying to protect to start with. So that's just a point, floodway plus 50 feet, and then the zone 2 is 25 feet. So
Can, you mind if I add on to that as well?
One
So-
thing that I've always wanted to get done through IT, the 40-foot drainage or 40-acre drainage areas catch us by surprise sometimes because it doesn't show up as blue lines on GIS.
Yeah.
And it does on y'all's end, we just can't see it. If there's a way to get that added, because it could help the general public, it could help everybody get ahead of some of these buffers before they buy a property or have to come to us. I know there's a beta version of GIS out there right now I found the other day. And all the buffers or a lot of the buffers are gone on it. And there was some,
And we do flag those parcels. They are all flagged. All of our 40-acre parcels are flagged as well, so it should have the 40-acre flag on it.
I don't know if we don't see it.
They don't
can't
see
see
it?
flags.
Yeah, the public can't see that only, so we submit a plan and we get a comment, guess what, there's a buffer. It's
And,
like,
and,
oh.
yeah, and I don't know how,
Is the parcel viewer you're talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah, the new parcel viewer doesn't even have buffers on it.
yeah, that needs to be
Yeah, that was a comment I already had on that one.
That's the first thing I check when people ask me about a property, and a lot of times, you know, they would have no idea there was such a buffer.
And it only shows
It's
zone
extremely
1 buffer,
helpful.
right? It doesn't even show zone 2 buffer on those.
Right.
'Cause we've
how
had
do we
that.
get that fixed?
I mean, it should just be a button, I'm sure. It's on the existing one. They just messed up when they translated it to the
Why
new
don't we,
platform.
we'll let that as an item for us to
Yeah.
add to our list to talk to maybe ITS to see if we can.
Yeah.
Actually, it may be planning, so we will probably either talk to ITS, planning, or a combination of the two to see about getting those incorporated.
Yeah, the people creating it don't even know what the buffers are, so they just missed it.
The 40-acre drain also, in our flags, would also apply to a storm network that's underground that would carry over 40 acres. So sometimes you may get a false positive because of a storm drain. I will add to the buffer discussion for the 30-foot buffers and the, the 50-foot buffers. It's the stream width plus the 30-foot. So if somebody shows a 60-foot buffer, then that's just not right. That means there's no stream width itself. So on a plan that would have a 30-foot buffer zone, we would expect to see maybe a 4-foot top width of channel plus 30 and 30 on both sides. So the 50-foot, you know, if they just show 30 plus 20, 50, so they show a 100-foot buffer, then we would automatically flag it and say, you're essentially showing us no stream width. So we would expect a buffer like that to be just say 106 feet to maybe accommodate a 6-foot top of width channel plus 50 on both sides. And I guess the key thing is to know that both of those buffers and the others for the ponds and wetlands are from the demarcation point onward. And like Roger was saying, the floodway is not through the demarcation point. So you could have that mark as far as the streams with the floodway. You may have a top of bank, but the floodway may protrude another, 70 feet beyond that.
Yeah.
So the answer would be, on the floodway buffer, if they just show us 150 feet, just say 75 on both sides, then we know that's not right because we fully expect to see whatever the width of the floodway is, plus that 75 feet on both sides if it encompasses both sides of the property.
And
And
the other
we
thing
have more and more. We just in June of this year adopted 18 new map panels. And the bulk of what went into those new panels, the reason for revising 18 old panels was because we picked up a number of tributaries to various creeks and the tributaries to the Cumberland River that had not been previously mapped, modeled or mapped. And just as an example, there was along 7 Mile Creek, just north of Brentwood, there's Berrywood Branch, there's Brentwood Branch, are 2 creeks that are tribs to the 7 Mile Creek, but neither of those creeks had ever been modeled or mapped. And there were a good number of houses along those creeks. And so you have FEMA flood maps that show no modeling or no mapping of those structures, and all these people that say, well, I'm not in the floodplain. Well, there were 400 structures that once we modeled and mapped and adopted those 18 new panels, there were 400 in excess of 400 parcels that I sent letters to saying, congratulations, you're now in a modeled and mapped reach of creek in the flood insurance map system. A couple of years ago, we adopted 60 modified panels that largely were for the same reason, same purpose. So the next new round of modeling and mapping will be the Cumberland River. We'll start to see some new data as early as March of this year. We've been talking about, I think we've talked about it before this group, and we certainly convey to the developers of, for example, the developers of the East Bank, that they have to consider that the flood level, the base flood elevation is going to rise by about 3 feet with this new modeling of the Cumberland River. And so that's big, it's significant. It's along the river itself, but beyond the river, it's the backwater that extends up every creek, every trib to the Cumberland. Those will all be impacted as well.
If the people modeling that, if that's their primary job and specialty.
That's Barry Moran at the Corps of Engineers.
How is he off 3 feet for decades?
You know, I think
that's what I mean. It's like, that's mind blowing to me.
It is considering even that in 2017, it was lowered by a foot. And I'm like, how embarrassing is that to be the modeler and to have created a model that's, but there's a lot of flow modeling that has gone into this new thing. Flow modeling, what was done in 2017 when we revised every panel in the entire, there's 150 or so panels. And what was done in 2017 is that we incorporated new LIDAR data for the first time ever. And so that provided for improved topographic information in the model, but it didn't really do anything with respect to the flows in the river. And so, you know, it's...
If I might, I wanted to, and if Roger's done, because that is significant, I wanted to circle back to the 40 acres and the 40-acre drainage area, because I want to be clear and clarify something. In the beginning, when we adopted the buffers, everybody, staff, customers, everyone, they wanted to know where the buffer applied. And obviously, that's different on a case-by-case basis. Is it a stream or not? But we wanted to try to identify at least an initial starting point by which someone could say it is possible this is a stream. When we looked at what that was, and obviously we see groundwater springs coming up that has 0 drainage area, and sometimes at 100 acres you might, well, maybe not at 100, but 50, let's say, not being a stream. But 40 acres did seem to be the spot at which in a average drainage that you would start to see enough groundwater flow for it to be a stream. So that is where the 40 acres came from. But over time, and Rebecca happens to be a hydrologic professional, the gold standard now is a hydrologic determination, and that is the basis of the buffer. So we want to buffer, in essence, waters of the state and streams. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that the 40 acre is still kind of the primary thing. We are always looking at stream determinations from HD professionals and applying it from that perspective. And we can obviously get you that drain model. We all still have it, but it's just a starting point. Maybe zooming back a little bit more, and I'm struck by this is right, we consider a water quality buffer. I did want to just say, from a historical concept, when Metro was first considering no disturb riparian stream buffers, there were several things that policy was meant to address. And water quality was certainly one of them, but there were other community concerns. The first of which at the time was there were parcels that, because of their proximity to streams, were subject to flooding and impacts of flooding that were developed well before regulations were in place. So the thought was, if we're going to start regulating stormwater more, we need to also make sure the issues we're seeing now aren't repeated in the future. So giving streams room to meander and as the floodplains change or are established, giving that level of protection, so that was one. Another one that was interesting was wildlife corridors. As Metro developed, there needed to be places for the wildlife to continue to still migrate through the community. And then another one was, and it's been discussed a lot at some past meetings, was in association and in coordination with parks to establish greenways. At the time, they were having some difficulty getting properties in that program and promoting that network within the city. So that was seen as a way to set aside those areas and to allow for those greenways to go into place because they were in those buffers. Now, as I think Rebecca's going to elaborate, and this whole process has involved living and learning and tweaking. So we don't want like superhighway greenways. So there are things we've put in for that, and our office is involved with approving those. But it is, the no disturb riparian buffers are meant to benefit the community, and it's not just related to water quality. It is a practice that is supposed to afford a lot of protection to the community. And the studies are fairly clear that when you have buffers, and this is a little bit technical, but the benthic values of the stream increases. And that's important because that goes toward the scoring of the streams. Does it get listed for non-attainment? And the bigger issue of the buffers, and something to keep in mind, and Rebecca mentioned we're a little bit more stringent than TDEC in some ways. The fact of the matter is, when you look at the TDEC regulatory attainment status of streams, they list sources and reasons why it is, which establishes some regulatory obligation. And in urban areas, such as Metro Nashville, you will see things like MS4 area or urban area. So this, in part, is an indirect way to try to apply some additional protections to improve water quality. And there have been a lot of studies that have shown that these things are beneficial toward that regard. So it's a very nuanced and I don't want to say it's a complicated policy, but there is a lot that plays into our buffer policy, where it came from and how we continue to try to administer it to sort of, reconcile the community needs with the protections that need to be in place. So, sorry, Rebecca, proceed.
Oh, not at all.
One more clarifying question, sorry.
Yeah, no.
The 40 acres, you mentioned something about a false positive. So is this all over the 40 acres is overland? You were mentioning underground systems that would trigger the 40. I just wanted clarification, if you don't.
So on our GIS, the clarification is on our GIS, there's a lot of times we had a 40-acre drain listed on our internal model that you cannot physically see. And we would have flags, which, once again, you cannot see, and our flag would indicate to us as a plan reviewer that there's a 40-acre drain nearby. And you're looking, we're like, well, this is a kind of urban type area. We don't see a stream or a ditch, and it's because it was channelized inside a pipe network. So as you get closer to downtown Nashville, and as you get closer to the treatment plant, even in the combined sewer system, the combined sewer networks, as they get close to the treatment plant, will end up showing, which I'll talk to Logan about trying to add as well, it'll show a square mile. So a square mile for us in the stormwater world is the trigger to say, oh, square miles here, we need a flood study if there doesn't exist one. You could see a square mile in a lot of the areas, maybe in Germantown. There's not a physical surface drainage way that's carrying a square mile. It's just in a pipe network that's underground. So we see the flag, it's a trigger in our head to say, hey, we need to do a little bit more research to see, oh, hey, here's the ditch. It could be a stream, or no, there's no ditch in sight, it's nothing but parking lots. And then we will check to see the pipe networks, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it raises a flag for you to prove it's not a stream. It doesn't mean that there absolutely is a buffer.
Correct. And then
It's
we
just a
resolve the
trigger
flag
for them
in the
to say,
system.
uh-oh, this one could be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One question on the 3-foot change of the FEMA modeling. I assume then that changes the floodway location, that then changes where the 75-foot buffer would be from, thinking about, the Cumberland River, the tributaries. Do we know the impact of that change yet in terms of
No, we
when?
don't.
And because I assume that could have a lot of impact on things like this committee, if it's changing that floodway that then is moving that 75-foot buffer further in, not to mention just the 3-foot change is significant. Can there be like a work session or an overview once we have some information to understand what, more information about that? It seems significant, and it's going to bring a lot of properties, or it's going to affect potentially a lot of properties, and just curious to how we understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's something we can certainly do, and again, by March, we should have really, there is a lot, if you call Barry Moran at the Corps of Engineers, and you have a specific site, specific location, he can pull up what your base flood elevations are for that parcel. We don't have immediate access to that right now, other than just the ability to call Barry and say, what about this parcel?
Yeah, okay.
But by March, we should begin to have some of that information. But we're several years away from completing models and completing new maps, and then FEMA obviously has to go through their process. And so we're several years away from that, but at the same time, if you're doing like I like to describe it, if we consider this to be best available data or available data, depending on how FEMA describes that. But if you're building $10 billion worth of improvements on the East Bank, it makes no sense in the world to allow that to proceed under a set of standards that we know is going to be already kind of overridden, I guess.
I think you actually just answered the question, because we've been talking about the new modeling for a couple of months now.
Yeah.
What we are faced with when we're looking at cases, we have to look at the current standards, but it sounds like, my question was going to be when we actually think the new modeling is going to be the official standard. I know it's not something that you can officially answer. It sounds like you all will be getting more information in March, and then could take many, many months thereafter. That's where we hear the new modeling, and, but we have to make decisions based off of what the current standards are.
This is an odd standard, because if you build under the 2018 building code and it changes to the 22, you're not now all of a sudden non-compliant or uninsurable. But when floodplain or flood elevations change, all of a sudden now you might have to carry flood insurance. Is that accurate? I mean, it's...
Can I ask a question too about, you mentioned the Cumberland and what maps, is the whole model, it's Cumberland and all tributaries? Is it just specifically the Cumberland, or are we going to have a comprehensive update?
Up to now, we've regularly referred to it as new modeling on the Cumberland. But the fact of the matter is that it's going to affect, backwater on a lot of creeks and streams. So it's going to affect some distance upstream of where the confluence of the creek and the Cumberland are. So it's going to extend upstream some distance, but I don't have,
And I don't know how the FEMA panels, if there are more than one that covers, but you're saying all of those will be updated at once, or just specific ones? I'm just trying to figure out what's coming in March, how geographically comprehensive that is.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Okay.
Even if you exclude the tributaries, if you just look at the Cumberland by itself, that's a plethora of panels.
Yeah.
And I do want to clarify something. The modelers that are doing the studies are some of the best in the world. I don't think they did any catastrophic errors previously to result in a 3-foot rise this time versus last time. I think it's a function of better information. We have a change in land values, end values, as far as the roughness and stuff like that goes. I think this is just best available information with added information versus a previous error and correction.
Right.
Yeah, and part of the review process that has involved and is perhaps even presently being involved is a review of the results of this model conducted by the actual authors of the guys in California that wrote the HEC-RES model. So the Corps, they're part of the Corps of Engineers. So while Steve just referred to the best modelers in the world, these perhaps, if these are the guys that actually wrote the HEC-RAS model, maybe they're the best modelers in the universe. So it's not, there's no shortage of input to this process, but it remains to be seen, I think, exactly how long it takes. You can call me Roger, or you can call me Mr. Lindsay, but I suspect by the time this model comes out, you can call me retired.
But still consulting.
Yeah. So if I could add, I have done flood modeling and not like at the level of detail that the Corps is doing. So 10, 15 years ago, we were using like 30 by 30 square meter grid cells and estimating this is what the land use is there, what the coverage is, without having like good digital elevation models that now are sub-meter that you can use depending on where you're at and the availability of data. So the generalization and averaging of what the land use type is and the coverage for the N coefficient, Manning's N, for how that water is going to flow over the surface and accumulate. A lot of that has improved, as well as computational abilities and understandings. So even HAZUS, which FEMA uses for requires for hazard mitigation plans, is not a good model. I've used it a lot. It is a fill the bathtub approach, and we've seen lots of errors and issues with that. That is not what is used for the actual flood maps, but the modeling helps to inform, and then it goes through a process of adoption before flood insurance rates are set and those things. Thankfully, we're in a community where we're part, where there is benefits because we're part of the CRS program, the community rating system. So because of efforts by Roger and Tom and others, those flood insurance rates are lower than what they would have to be. But I don't think it's that he was, the modeling was off by 3 feet. We just have better data and better model capabilities to more accurately represent what it should be.
Based
Also,
on rain coverage, but not in rainfall intensity. I mean, that's what's never changed.
The NOAA Atlas
right?
15 has actually,
They've changed that?
they've changed the rainfall intensity. I don't know if that's being used in the current models,
I don't-
but NOAA Atlas 14 is significantly out of date, and there's research to show that.
Are we going to adopt the new intensities, and is that going to greatly change?
We have not adopted the new intensities because they were lower, which would have resulted in.
It depends on where you're at, yeah.
So how's the water going up 3 feet?
Which would have resulted in smaller detention ponds for our developments. If you want to bring it up to the next engineering development services meeting, you can feel free to do that.
They weren't lower by a lot.
The other challenge is with the Cumberland, because it is a managed river system, you're getting inflow from upstream that you have to account for different flow rates that are being released by the dam, as opposed to just the pure overland flow going into the river. So it's a complicated system.
And there are floods of record. If you go back, they can go back. They've got data that goes back 200 years. So, and that's part of what it looks like. I've got Cumberland River studies in my office that show that there have been maybe 100 events on the river that exceed the 2010 flood. Most of them prior to when the river became a managed river. Because there are multiple dams that have been constructed since the 1940s and 50s and 60s, and yet there are a number of rain events that have resulted in bigger floods.
I will say this is interesting because on a lot of the variance cases that involve buffers, we end up circling back around to floodplain considerations. So anyway.
No. I mean, like I said, I'm sitting down. I expected this to be a conversation, not, a hardcore presentation. So no, this is good. We're enjoying not having cases, I think, in front of us right now. And a final continuation on what Michael was saying, back to TDEC and what they allow us to do and don't allow us to do. TDEC also regulates us. They list streams. And then at a certain point, if we aren't improving that water quality, they do not come after us. They do issue TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, which basically puts us on notice that we have to improve things. So we'll have TDEC on one side saying, sure, encapsulate, fill in those wetlands, whatever. And then they're coming to us saying, you guys got to improve your water quality, or we're going to tell you exactly what can go into it.
And list the source as urbanization or MS4 area. So it's really, it's a subtle nuance to what we're doing. It's another way that we try to promote overall compliance for Metro Nashville in the various regs that we're under. And again, trying to reconcile development considerations with how do we make sure. And we work very diligently, and we've gotten a lot of streams delisted where the TMDL requirement does not come into play. But it is something that we are always evaluating behind the scenes.
So we do try to keep a lot of things off you all's plates, and we are constantly, if we see some things that are commonly coming towards you that you're, approving on a regular basis, we do try to make some of that stuff staff level to keep them, off your agenda. We do have a list in the manual. There are certain maintenance that can be done in buffers without having to ask permission. A lot of those are dead, disease, or hazardous trees. Now, I do get a lot of calls, somebody says, oh, I'm looking at this buffer and there's a tree leaning over, and I'm like, well, is it gonna hit anything? They're like, well, no, just the buffer. And we're like, well, let it fall, circle of life, but people do want the buffers to look neater than they do. We do let storm debris be cleaned up if it has the potential to block a waterway. Also, sight lines, we evaluate those. We work with NDOT sometime. They have a formula for how fast you can drive down the road and how far you have to see out. So we let people clear those without having to ask. We also allow for restoration and enhancement of buffers without coming to you. And in some cases, it's to remove invasives. We do require native plantings, an LA plan with a 2-year survivability. A lot of times people just want to clean up the buffer and go out and remove all the invasives, but they have no plan to plant anything back and no plan to return it to it. So that's why we kind of require that they submit a plan. There are some cases where we don't require plans, like weed wrangles in Metro Park and things like that, where they're just truly going out and removing those invasive species.
Rebecca, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I feel like this has come up a lot about debris in the waterways. And obviously, you talked about maybe a single landowner cleaning up. How does Metro Water approach that and balance the water quality? Because things do fill up in the waterways that impact the surrounding owners.
We try to err on the side of safety. So if it does appear, or if people are really, really afraid that, something could bind on a bridge or something could block a culvert or something and backwater up on their property, we do let them go out. We do have crews that will also go out and respond and remove that debris if they fear it's going to come into play. And then we also have nonprofit partners like the Cumberland River Compact, and they do sometimes large woody debris cleanups from larger flood events to clear those areas out. But we also do stream cleanups with trash. That doesn't usually cause as much of a flooding issue. Does that speak to what you were asking?
Yeah, I feel like more and more you hear it. I mean, it candidly even came up in my confirmation. People, there's quite a bit of debris, leaves. I mean, and I know that those biodegrade over time, but just limbs and whatnot. And when the flooding is increasing, obviously people are looking for ways to decrease it. And so I live near Browns Creek and people back up to it. And I'm just curious how, and they've experienced flooding, does Metro Water have a program where they do evaluate after big rains, or just the quality of the volume that these can handle and balance that with water quality?
There is, if we get complaints about trees or debris or brush or whatever blocking a conveyance under a roadway, we're quick to hop on that. But if somebody calls and says a tree has fallen in my backyard and it's fallen across the creek, we stop short of what might be considered to be improvements of personal or private property. There's not enough manpower in this city to go out and keep every creek in the city clean. So that's
Yeah, and I would just add, those are all case-by-case considerations depending on the segment. I will say our maintenance crews do go out. They have rain routes where they have inlets or cross drains that they know tend to clog. What you don't want ever is an inlet to blind, which could create flooding conditions. But over time, they've got a list of those sites, and they do go out and look at those. But generally speaking, the trees falling into drainage ways and associated things have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
What was kind of eye-opening to me was watching, I lived in a house that I built, we've moved, but I watched over 4 years the roadside ditch just fill up and kind of disappear. And that made me realize in all these satellite cities, Forest Hills, Oak Hill, Belmead, they don't necessarily maintain their roadside ditches or redig them. And it can change the drainage patterns. And I've seen people, all of a sudden the ditch fills up and the water starts overtopping and things just change. And then when you try to reestablish them, you're like, oh, wow, where'd this water come from?
Yeah,
and it used to be there.
Additional
it's
challenges
just
to
crazy.
that are in some of this infill construction.
Yeah.
Where, one house gets torn down and rebuilt, another house is 40 years old, the next house was torn down and rebuilt, and then the consistency of drainage, because we do routinely maintain drainage within right-of-ways of the streets, which includes like cleaning out stopped-up culverts and things like that, culverts under driveways. We have standards that require minimum size, 15 inches, Steve? It is. 15 inches is a minimum size culvert that needs to be installed, but sometimes it's a challenge to do that if every other house in a long stretch has been rebuilt and has a new concrete driveway and trying to maintain, an appropriate fall in the creek and things like that, because we will come out and 99 times out of 100, clean out somebody's ditch or reestablish a flow line in the ditch or clean out the culvert or what have you. So that's a pretty routine maintenance effort on our part.
And if I might get even further away from Rebecca's presentation, I do think it's worth noting that as somebody who goes to the Emergency Operations Center during flood events, it has been very gratifying over time to see when there would be a flood, you could almost guarantee the sites that were going to start coming in for flooding issues. And between the preventative maintenance activities for stormwater and the capital projects, most all of those big chronic flooding events or areas now have been resolved. And so it's kind of total quality control. Over time, we continue to look at areas, what are areas that are being impacted, and we have made a lot of great strides, and we're left working with some of these site-by-site issues, but there have been a lot of tremendous improvements in the capital infrastructure, too, in some of the areas that historically had created a lot of flooding issues. I'm talking about roads flooding and whatnot.
And our stormwater master planning efforts are working to identify all those other sites for us to then look at development in those areas and how it can be impacted. And one final thing I'd like to note is that people are still using the ditches and streams as a place to dispose of their leaves and their branches and everything else. I mean, you drive around and you can see right now, it's like, oh, there's a low spot. We'll just put our yard waste there and Mother Nature will take care of it. So we're combating that as well. We do have door hangers that we go, harass neighbors with, but it doesn't always work.
That's been done since the beginning of mankind.
I know.
Fill the low spots with your waste.
Sinkholes,
So-
you'll never see it again.
Yeah,
Put the old
it's human
car in
nature.
there, yeah. We also have this table 6.3 for those of you really familiar with our manual. I think it used to be table 6.2 for those of you who've been doing this way too long. Trails, I'll talk about that later, but we do try to make sure, avoid conflicts between metro departments. So, or when metro department is requiring sidewalks and we have buffers, we try to make sure we can take care of that on a staff level instead of bringing it to you guys. We have that 1,000-foot requirement, and we're going to be talking about that, I guess, on the next revision as well. But the idea is a continuous buffer is the best buffer you could have, because as soon as you put breaks in that buffer, those are the entry points for the water and more pollutants. Along those lines, we like the 3-sided culverts. We believe that in many cases, or spans can maintain the natural stream bed, which is best. And a lot of these things in here are just to kind of push developers to use them. Not that we use you guys as a threat, but sometimes we do. Sometimes we'll say, well, if you go ahead and do a 3-sided culvert or a span, then you don't have to take it to the committee. And, it's easier, faster plan approval. It saves them money and time as well. We did, in the last iteration, also come up with a single-family residential infill program. Not all of them come to you, even though a lot of them, we do have a way for staff to approve their disturbances. So if they're in an existing neighborhood and their neighbors are maintaining the buffer, adjacent to them, as long as they aren't putting structures or impervious surfaces in the buffers, we do allow for them, as long as they agreed not to maintain a certain portion of it. We give them half their buffer, basically, that they can continue to disturb, just so that they don't come here. And we do understand it's pretty impactful if all of a sudden you have people on either side of you mowing all the way down to the top of bank, and then you all of a sudden have this giant buffer on your property. So that is an option we wanted to make sure that you were aware of.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
You alluded to maybe this at the last meeting, but 6.3, how are greenways, is that something that the staff is gonna?
Perfect segue. Here we go. Okay, so we used to have greenways in our permissible buffer impact table. Metro Legal was kind enough to let us know that in Metro Code, we cannot treat Metro differently than private development, unless it goes to Metro Council by resolution. So what we ended up doing is we pulled greenways out of that table, and we took that to Metro Council with resolution to allow them certain disturbances. Now, back when we did put this into play, it was the heyday of greenways, and most of the greenways were going in an old farmland or, areas where they weren't forested or associated with development. So it was just, a flat trail through an area. Usually me and Mark Bradfield, for those of you who remember him, we would go out there and walk it, or he'd drive it in his big old Jeep, and we'd, run the path of the greenway and avoid trails, make sure we got certain areas where people could see the water, because there is a value in them appreciating that resource. But as you can see, I think it's the Mill Creek Greenway over by animal control, it's falling in. A lot of those older greenways just got too close to the top of bank and streams move. So we try to make sure that they pull away in those areas. And I can send you the resolutions, but I'll read a couple whereases. So, whereas at-grade Metro Greenway trails result in minimal impacts to stormwater quality and quantity considerations. So that idea is that the area is so wide, it's such a small paved area. If we're doing a sheet flow off of it, we aren't going to have too many impacts to water quality. And then, whereas Metro Greenway trails provide public recreational resources and connectivity to the community, provide visual and physical access to Nashville's waterways, conserve green space and scenic view sheds along Nashville waterways, and were intended use of the water quality buffer. So that's in there. Now, these greenways still may have to come to you if they have if there's grading involved, if there are bridges, if there are retaining walls, if it's more than just a simple at-grade greenway, or if we reach an impasse with parks as to where we feel that greenway should be, then you all are the default on that. So in addition to greenways, Metro Water Services, we gave ourselves a resolution, but that's for the maintenance and construction of water, sewer, and storm lines, not necessarily associated with development. In a lot of those cases, we don't want trees or buffers, over those lines. So we're able to approve those as well. And then the other one was Public Works, now NDOT. If it's a sidewalk, road, or bridge funded or partially funded by NDOT, then we can review those on a staff level and not bring them to you.
Right. I was just going to note, while it doesn't have to come to you, it does have to be approved by the NPDS office staff, which is what historically may get someone like Rebecca out walking a greenway or working with them as they site greenways and whatnot. So there is still a level of oversight, just not requiring a variance.
So,
Can I ask one question on the,
Yep.
back one slide, the metro project impacts? I've been getting some feedback from whether it's metro schools or metro parks and the costs of metro water services, water quality fees. Are those fees the same for private and public entities? And is there opportunity to offer resolution to reduce those for public projects? Some of them are pretty massive.
So,
And where does that money go?
so the new stormwater capacity fees do apply to all properties, whether it's a metro project, whether it's greenways or metro water, or if it's your development that you're doing through your office. I think the only real exception to the rule is those that have a certain amount of affordable housing. Those, they could have a waiver on the capacity fees, stormwater capacity fees upon request. We have approved every one of those requests so far. But I've had the conversations with parks as well. It's a fee that went in for projects that were submitted January 1st of this year. So as we're getting close to approving a lot of these projects, there's that headache has come up. We have checked, and we expect Greenways to pay the fees just like we're expecting Metro Water to pay the fees when we come up with their.
I think we're talking about two different things. You were asking about water quality in lieu of fee.
Yes.
Not necessarily the stormwater
Okay.
capacity fee.
Okay, because we've had discussions with parks recently over the capacity fees. The in lieu of fees, I don't recall that we've had many submittals of in lieu of fees coming
Like,
to us.
it would be an example of like a turf field going in for Metro Public Schools or something where they're not able to qualify that as storage, and they're having to pay a fee in lieu of. And it's a pretty massive, these are massive numbers.
Not really what I want to talk about today.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That's another topic.
About artificial turf,
Metro
because
project impacts and way to improve our collaboration between the
But if you
entities.
reduce the fee, that just gives them a way to not have to comply with water quality regulations. So it'd be challenging. You'd be setting a different standard for them than
Yeah.
everybody else. So
Okay.
that's the backfire in that whole conversation.
I'll be honest, the information available for artificial turfs as far as, is it a,
Don't start it. Don't go there.
okay.
But it's a topic I think we should discuss at some point.
Yeah,
I mean,
but it's a 4-hour conversation.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a staff conversation, not
Yeah, okay,
not a
good.
commission conversation.
I would just say one thing, generally speaking, just keep in mind to fairly judge every project that comes in, just like we heard, we've got to treat Metro the same as everybody else. We're basing it on specs. And that's what all of this discussion in the end comes down to, is how to, whatever someone is proposing, how does it involve a spec? And I agree. We don't want to get into it right now, but the turf and the artificial turf, it is challenging given the design standards for that functionally versus our pervious paver standards. But it is something that is under consideration by us. The problem that we've run into in surveying that nationwide is different cities are all over the place on how they handle that. A lot of cities consider it complete imperviousness. Other cities don't. So anyway, a discussion for later.
I will say that we do expect Metro Water to uphold all the regulations that we enforce on others. And in most cases, we do personally, our groups, we do expect Metro Water to go a little bit above and beyond. So with that said, we want to go above and beyond. General Services has partnered with us on some of their projects. They like to go above and beyond, or they used to. I think they still may. But we would really like and hope other metro agencies, whether it's parks or anybody else, to follow the same suit of not only applying or meeting the regulations to the T, but maybe a little bit beyond because they are a metro entity.
And the same goes for stormwater user fees. So Metro Water and any metro entity would pay a stormwater user fee just like anybody else would, at the same rate. And that's a study of the water and sewer and stormwater fees is underway right now. So there will be some changes. we've always kind of complained that sometimes the residential component pays a higher percentage than some of the commercial components. And so we're cautiously optimistic that we'll go away from the tier system that we have right now that was established in 2009 when the stormwater fees went into place, and that there'll be more like an ERU system, which most of the cities in the country use. It'll be more of a calculated rate based on your impervious area. So we'll see how that comes out. But right now, the average residential user pays about $6 a month, and astoundingly, and there are cities like Knoxville, when you say, "Have y'all got stormwater user fees?" and the response is, "No, our city council won't have it, won't touch that with a 10-foot pole." And I'm not saying it's not painful, because I personally talked to thousands of users that were just irate about a $3 a month user fee when they went into place in 2009. But today, the average residential user pays $6 a month, and it produces about $36 million a year in revenues that we're able to do all kinds of stormwater upgrades, stormwater projects, repair of insufficient roadway culverts and pipes, and the replacement of all of our rusting out corrugated metal pipes, and with new concrete piping and culverts and things like that. It's just astounding. And I talk to the guys in Knoxville, every year at meetings, and I'm like, "Still no stormwater fee?" And no, they don't. And I'm like, $36 million a year for a $6 a month typical fee. So we'll see how that goes. There will be some changes to some of the larger users, and so that's to come.
So one just Greenway clarifying question. So right now, still, if it's a Greenway within the buffer, it has to come before us unless it's 5 foot wide and not paved?
No, if it's an at-grade greenway, it starts with us, and if we can approve it, it never comes to you.
Okay, because
Remember
the
the
resolution.
structural switchback on the one that we had to approve?
Yeah, that was different. Okay.
Not in
And that's
at-grade.
because of the resolution that was passed for
Yeah,
it. Okay.
yeah.
And just because I just talked about it, greenways are one area that we do not collect stormwater user fees on greenways. So, we don't measure the length of the greenways. So.
So all that being said, buffers still get disturbed a lot. And we now actually have what we call informally the buffer police. We've ramped up our SCM, our stormwater control measure inspections. And we have, how many inspectors do we have now, Michael? We have 4 inspectors now. And so they also inspect buffers. When they go out to a site and they look at a bioretention area or an underground water quality unit, they're also making sure those buffers are still in place as they were shown on the plans.
And that's on top of their SCM inspections, which we now have over 8,000 SCMs that we have to routinely inspect per our MS4 permit. So that number just keeps going up.
I was expecting you to say 40.
40,000?
No, 40 people,
Yeah.
inspectors.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
One
that's
guy gets
4
sick,
for
a quarter of the county isn't getting inspected.
I was gonna say
We,
that's
we
4
aim
the
for
whole county.
efficiency, but and we've got good processes in place. But one of the things I will say that we identified early on was there's a lot of time and effort, obviously you all know, to do this planning on site, do the engineering, run it through plans review, and then build it. We had the resources to do that for many years. The lacking part was the following up over time, and a lot of these SCMs went years and didn't really get much follow-up. So now that's no longer the case. So when it rains, we can be assured the SCMs, whether for quantity or quality, are functioning. There are a few of those that takes longer, but we are really happy with the progress of that program. And really, all of this effort would have been a non-effect if we weren't going out now and making sure they stay functional.
Quick question, on a lot of our landscape plans where we have our 2-year sort of survival, are people going out to check as a part of that once we approve?
That is a little, yes, is a short answer.
Okay.
Sometimes the project gets signed off by our grading permit inspectors, but as soon as that grading permit project in our database system is marked complete, that then starts the SEM inspection, so it moves over to the SEM inspector group, and they should be looking at that, yes.
We don't have that process on infill houses yet. We're working to get that, so. Those are gonna be our priority, is probably the variant sites first, and the floodplain sites, we'll probably be inspecting.
Those are only trees in bioponds and things like that. You're not, I mean, y'all aren't inspecting site-wide.
No, I don't
probably
think.
know better than anybody.
The SEMs.
I've got a lot of projects that might do an addition 4 years later, and the OA goes out there and says, wait, 25% of the trees are dead. We're gonna have to replace these and do the, whatever we would need to do.
Yeah, in the, like, in a
Nobody knows until we do a
bioretention,
project.
that would be part of what they would check, or if there was the 2-year condition on a variance that was approved.
And, yeah, that's about it. We do still get a lot of buffer disturbances. We work with the property owners a lot to get them restored, to bring them into compliance, and just know by the time you guys finally see one, we have exhausted probably every avenue. So, but luckily, we don't bring too many of those to you all. So that is all I have. If anybody has another question about a floodway or floodplain, Roger's right there.
I think I can speak for most of us. Thank you so much. This was really helpful, especially for me as a new commissioner. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, and Roger, and Steve, and Mike. All right, I think, hey, the other question I have related, just real quick on the Metro stuff, is planning. Remember they were doing the study on impact for infills, and there was going to be a phase 2 of that. Is that happening, or is that still on pause? Roger, you gave me the confused look.
There is an update. I think Steve's been somewhat primary on that, so I'll let him speak to it.
I didn't really catch what you said.
I'm sorry, I talked real fast. Planning was doing a study on the impact of all of the infill development, and there was a phase 2 that was in discussion.
I think Dustin did a presentation for us.
Sure, Dustin Shane. Yeah, we did a phase 1 study of our stormwater infill criterias. The phase 1 study kind of resulted that a lot of our flooding issues that we have are not really centered around stormwater redevelopment and more for maybe lack of maintenance or lack of infrastructure in the area. So that's what the phase 1 study came back and kind of stated. And Councilman Druffel had suggested that maybe we should look more into it to see if there's other avenues of improvements. And we are working on, I think we're going to have a meeting with him in the next couple of weeks, and Councilmember Berkeley Allen potentially, about giving them an update on some things that we feel that we could do internally to strengthen the single-family infill regulations, and maybe potentially not do the phase 2 study. That phase 2 study had a considerably high price tag. So we're trying to see if there's ways that we could internally make adjustments with the things that we know that could really be a big bang for the buck kind of items. So we're going to present that relatively soon to the council member, and I think he plans on maybe presenting it to the maybe Transportation Commission maybe in January. So we'll see. We'll see. We think that we have something pretty solid that we would like to present to them, which involves maybe, like I said, strengthening some of their single-family stuff, maybe strengthening our tree credits, things of that nature. I think a lot of big victories, so we're really hopeful that this will be deemed as a positive and that we can move forward with this.
Great. Okay. I lost it. I had another Metro one, but we'll move on. Logan, are we going to talk about the video you sent, or is there anything else?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I had was just about the regulation update.
Okay.
I was going to try to go over that in January, but I'll make sure everybody has the documents. If you have comments on the documents or any changes, just let me know. We've gone through that pretty heavily in former meetings, but I know we've had some new members come on, so.
First Thursday in January is the 2nd.
We're going to be on the 9th.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved that meeting to the 9th, so.
Okay.
I don't have a room yet. We'll probably be in here. We're usually in here for January, but I'll send out an Outlook, just like I always do. Yeah, the other thing was about the compensatory mitigation. The engineer who is doing the Omohundro project and the mitigation project is going to be able to come in January and speak. We can play the video. I have the video on there. If you've seen the video, it's done by Friends of Shelby Park and Cumberland River Compact that kind of walks through that mitigation project. So you can do whatever you guys want.
No, I'm glad that they created a video. Hope the commissioners have a chance to watch it. They did a really good job. This was that where we as a commission encouraged them to, or encouraged Metro Water Services to work with Metro Parks to implement the compensatory mitigation program versus it going into a bank and it being used maybe out of our watershed. So this is where Metro Parks and Metro Legal work together to come together to develop an agreement that I think is a huge public benefit. And I hope this is a model for a future. And so I'm glad that they created a little PR piece and a great video that will help launch that.
I live really close to there, and the golf course has been closed for quite a few months to do upgrades. So I saw it often, and it was pretty impressive how quickly it got out. Like whenever it came through here, it started very quickly and moved very quickly to get completed. So it was really, hopefully, it's a nice model of how we can do more of that. I mean, it's a really nice project. It was done in a really quick and efficient manner, so it seemed.
Quick and efficient and tax dollars usually don't go together, but in this case it did, and so I'm all for that. I know Mr. Lewis definitely is, so.
I will note that it was neither a quick nor an efficient process. It was years in the making before it came to you guys. And yeah, it started in like 2017, I think was our first set of plans on that. So what you guys have seen, the magic of Metro, is it was quick and efficient, but it was it was beating our heads against the wall a lot.
The standard is seemed quick and efficient.
Yes, that's right.
It is an example that a lot of these things are in the works for a while. I know that particular project had been something we had pursued on three occasions to get that concrete line swale mitigated. So the stars aligned on this and it all came together.
Much better.
And I would even add to that, like as much as Parks does master planning and pays for those master planning services, it'd be nice to pay for shovel-ready stormwater improvement projects so that when these types of opportunities arise, bam, it's ready to go. I know that's maybe easier than I'm describing it, but that would be another approach, hopefully. So anyways.
There's a lot of that goes on. Every Tuesday afternoon, we have what we call a PIF meeting. And Ricky Swift's group with Matt Tays, they come in with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 projects almost every week that are below. Is it established by the total cost of the work, or where we're replacing maybe some culverts and enhancing the ditch down the next half dozen houses, and then maybe replacing another rotted out corrugated metal pipe. And so these projects are in neighborhoods all over Nashville, and Ricky does a presentation on them. They're largely constructed by contractors that are under contract to do this work. Walker Construction, I think, is one of the ones that does many of these, and they may be anywhere from $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 to $1.5 million. And so we're constantly. That's why when I tell Knoxville, I said, you're crazy not to charge a stormwater user fee, because we do hundreds of projects all over the city to enhance, drainage issues.
Yeah, and one other thing I would note that kind of ties into this is our group works with all the metro departments that have sites that were built before the water quality regs went in place, where we could go in and do a capital project to retrofit that. We just finished one on the Metro impound lot, create a water quality swale to serve that large area of imperviousness that was built decades ago. So we do a similar thing ourselves in trying to identify the low-hanging fruit on those type of sites across Metro, on Metro properties. And that gets you around the the conservation easement involved when you put these in, which gets to the heart of the matter on these. A lot of people's hearts are willing the conservation easement is really the main hurdle that has to be overcome on a lot of these. And it was, as a matter of fact, it was an issue with the golf course project because there's certain, had to reconcile the project goals with the goals of people out there playing golf. So that always comes into play.
Fair. All right.
If I can add, I just want to say I appreciate Metro being proactive and, some of my research, I see what happens in other communities and we kind of do this litmus test. Like Commissioner Fulmer was surprised that we only have 4 people inspecting as opposed to 40. So many communities have 0 and these, green infrastructure and those things go in and then they are failing within a couple of years because they're not being maintained. Nobody's keeping track of them. And that's a regular thing. And on the utility fees, in October, I missed the meeting. I was in New Orleans for a collaborative meeting, and we actually had a meeting with someone from the Water and Sewerage Board, and they exempt all universities, all government buildings, and from drainage fees, which are the equivalent of our stormwater fees. And they said, we can't do capital projects. We don't have the money to do them. And we're just essentially sinking. So I think that says, that's an example of what not to do when they have really significant drainage issues.
Commissioner Camp mentioned failing features. That's only a portion of what we get to see. I'm the recipient of a lot of these emails that whenever they don't maintain, but you'll be surprised to see that we will end up at projects and they will look and that bioretention area was supposed to be there. We had pictures of it. Now it's a deck, or now there's a building addition there, or now we're up on the roof looking at that green roof and it's no longer there. There's a fire pit. So
That's why I asked my question on some of these where we have new development coming in and we work really hard on getting landscape mitigation plan in place. And I just want to make sure that it's not sold off to the next person. They have no idea and they just go about their business.
What a huge disconnect between the developer or the entity doing it and the recipient or the end user. You're absolutely correct.
And to Commissioner Camp's comment a moment ago about New Orleans and exempting government buildings and things like that, we considered all of that with for example, our stormwater user fees. And we knew, for example, that the city of Chattanooga doesn't charge a stormwater user fee to anybody that's located on or contiguous to the Tennessee River as it flows through the city. And we're like, yeah, but they drive on our roads. They have to get to their facility, their plant on the river. They have to get there, and to do that, they drive on our bridges, they cross our roads, they cross our culverts. And so the matter was in the consideration of what constitutes our system. And certainly the creeks are our system. So why the heck not is the Cumberland River not part of our system? So we've never considered that it made sense to exempt, because there are a lot of larger industries and what have you along the Cumberland River. They need to pay a stormwater fee like everybody else does. And so that's another example of the way you consider what's an appropriate charge for a user fee, because they're using our roadways and things like everybody else is too, so.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in here and say that we do declarations that are tied to the deed for those stormwater infrastructure and any sort of features that we make them put on the property, such that when you sell the property, they should pull it, but it's often that they do miss it. And so then when we get questions in legal, by the time they get through water, we provide them with a copy of their declaration and say, yeah, you can't just put turf there like you can't cover up the, I think they just think it's poorly designed landscaping features when they first buy the house, and they think, oh, we'll just fill that in because I don't know why they have that big hole in their front yard.
We do see some interesting things. We've seen hot tubs, decks. We've seen a playground. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that they all do get checked, and they get checked efficiently, and we try to get to those as quickly as possible because we don't want people doing impacts and then having to reverse those costs. I will also say, we worked with ITS to create a tool where you can go online and you can look up your property and you will see if you have an SCM. If you do have a stormwater control measure, you can click it and it will pull up the long-term maintenance agreement. And that's been very helpful for us. That way people can go in and see what their obligations are on those properties and hopefully avoid some of those unfortunate situations where they've done something contrary to that long-term
You do now, but the new GIS might not have it yet.
This is supposed to be a standalone application. We've got a page on our website that gives you the instructions of how to do that. So if anybody ever wants it, let me know and I can get you to that.
All right. We done? Motion to adjourn?
Well, Logan, is there anything else?
No, after we adjourn.
Okay, all right, great. I heard a motion, second? Seconded? So moved. All right, everybody. Great meeting. End of the new year.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.